Picture yourself building or wanting to build a new PC. And obviously you don't want to do anything wrong. So you take your configuration that you have chosen and post it on forums or whatever to get some feedback to know if that configuration actually makes sense, because you don't have that much experience. Well, prepare for wild comment sections. There are probably gonna be a lot of people saying, or in most cases saying, oh, your CPU is going to bottleneck your GPU and vice versa. And what actually is a bottleneck? That's what we are going to talk about today, because as I said, that's often a topic that is talked about because some people don't really know what a bottleneck really is and why every system is bottlenecked at some point. First of all, what is a bottleneck? The definition of a bottleneck is that one component slows down another, which in some cases might be a CPU that is too slow for a GPU and the other way around. So this could be the case when, for example, you have a very CPU intensive game that is really hard on your CPU and your GPU cannot be utilized effectively, or rather to 100%. And obviously, this isn't the only topic or the only thing where a bottleneck can occur. There's also some structures within components that can cause a bottleneck. For example, the most common one you'd know is not enough video memory on your graphics card, for example. Nowadays, a lot of GPUs still have 8 gigabytes below the $200 mark, and above that, they tend to have 12 or even 16 gigabytes. And a lot of people tell you, well, you're gonna have issues with only 8 gigabytes. So, how do you avoid bottlenecks when building a PC or before you actually buy the components? Well, the ideal way would be buying a GPU or CPU that is appropriate in its price range to the other component. While that doesn't really mean the parts have to cost the same, but they need to produce the same FPS or similar FPS values in the games you want to play. But now comes the difficult part about this, because there are obviously CPU intensive games such as like City Skylines or Microsoft Flight Simulator, for example, that are played often, and they are much more CPU dependent than games like Forza Horizon 5 or other games that don't need as much CPU power. And there, the graphics cards often produce much better results. So, as I said in my video where I told you how to build a good gaming PC, I'd say always pick a CPU that is half the price of the graphics card in that system. So that most of the time works pretty good. Another thing would be always buy a stronger CPU than a graphics card, because then you are not going to be CPU limited and you have room to upgrade or to grow your graphics card in the future. That would be the easiest path. As for video memory, if you're gaming on 1080p, probably 8 gigabytes are going to be fine for now, because we don't know what's coming in the future. And some games actually already utilize the full 8 gigabytes of these graphics cards. So maybe you're better off buying 12 gigabytes if you are going to be using higher resolutions or higher detail levels. So maybe that's a reason to buy a 12 gigabyte or 16 gigabyte card. And yeah. But what if you actually bought your PC and you think you have a bottleneck? How to actually spot that? Well, the easiest thing is to look at some on-screen display, for example from MSI Afterburner or something that shows you the statistics of your components. I also have a video on how to exactly set up everything for an on-screen display. I'll link that in the description below so you know how to do that. But when looking at these statistics, it is most important to look at CPU and GPU utilization, or much more important is the GPU utilization, because on nowadays multi-core or high core count CPUs, the CPU utilization can be lower than 50% even and still have a CPU bottleneck. How to spot a CPU bottleneck though? Well, this is pretty easy. If your GPU isn't utilized above 95% all of the time, then you basically have a CPU bottleneck. Because then some component is, well, hindering the performance or hindering the FPS values of getting any higher. Again, if you are not using the GPU to 100%, obviously some other component might be the issue. So in theory, CPU performance would be the next thing that could improve that. Obviously, together with the CPU performance, there also is kind of RAM performance within that, because if you increase RAM clocks, then obviously CPU performance will also go up, but it's not by that much, but still that can make a difference. And yeah, that's basically the way you can spot this. And how do you spot lacking VRAM, or if you don't have enough VRAM? Well, that's pretty easy as well. If you have the video memory shown on the on-screen display as well, just look at it. If your card is 8 GB and it is somewhere over 8,000 megabytes in utilization, and you get stutters or some weird artifacts on the screen when, for example, playing games, then it seems like, or it could be that your video memory is full. This could also be just having low FPS. If you turn down texture settings and your FPS gets way better, then that also might be a cause of too little video memory. So that's also how to discover that. And a texture setting will, in most cases, if you have enough video memory, not affect performance in a big way. So that's how to spot if you have too little video memory. But how do you get rid of these bottlenecks? Really, you could obviously upgrade the hardware, but yeah, that's kind of in connection with cost. So that's kind of out of the question if you don't want to upgrade or pay for better hardware. You could overclock your CPU, overclock your RAM, and might get like 10 to 15% better performance if you are, for example, at the brink of getting to a playable frame rate, like 10 to 15%. For example, if you're like at 35, which is meh playable, and you want to get to like 40 or something, then overclocking might actually help if you're in the CPU limit. So that's something you could do as well. The other thing would be reducing some settings. There are lots of settings that do different stuff, but there are different settings that are reliant on different components, such as view distance or draw distance is one of the most popular ones to reduce when you have not enough CPU power. So if you reduce that, your CPU bottleneck will go down. If you basically have too many FPS, which maybe in some games isn't really, you can't have too many FPS, but if you have that, for example, if you have like 200 FPS or something, you could just use, for example, DSR or turn off DLSS to get a higher resolution that is actually displayed, or rather, if your display only has full HD, you could downsample to WQHD, so 1440p, or 4K, and get a sharper image without having more anti-aliasing, for example. Thus improve your image quality. And because you're on a GPU limit, well, your FPS are gonna drop, yeah. You're also having a sharper image. Because if you have a 60 Hz monitor, well, what use is it to have 100 plus FPS? So that's basically what are bottlenecks, how to identify them, and well, kind of how to get rid of them. They still exist, obviously. They are not magically gone, but at least you know how to, well, hide them a little better. And yeah, if you have any questions about bottlenecks, because I think there are a lot of people that want to know if their configuration is a decent configuration or if it would bottleneck in a few games, just let me know in the comments below. I would be happy to answer any questions about this. And otherwise, I wish you a nice day and goodbye.